Hello, Jen.
Hi, Lucien.
Lovely to see you.
Good to see you
So
always.
just a very short introduction for this video. It's going to be about communities and the role of communities in our transformation or awakening into, let's say, a new paradigm, a new world. We will probably look into what is a community, what defines a community, and connected to that, like the core question, like what does it mean to be human, what are communities evolving around values, what are those values, um, like all the beautiful things communities can do and give us a sense of belonging, our personal growth and awakening process, being held by a group of people. Jen, we know each other for quite some years, maybe more than, I don't know, 15, 20. We've both have been organizing tango festivals, me in Holland, you in beautiful Prague. So then after that, after a few years, we kind of lost track and we got together in a wonderful decentralized internet project by Threefold. So we were working there with a beautiful team of people to bring a decentralized grid of compute and storage capacity to the world. That's still ongoing. We kind of lost a bit of the track, but so there was a nice community of tech people embracing spirituality into the new world. And yes, what can I say about you? I mean, I really admire your knowledge. You're for me, you're like a sage, like almost, let's say, a grandmother wisdom essence you carry inside of yourself. I see you as a leader from the heart, from the very strong from the feminine, really caring and compassionate about all kind of opinions, all kind of things that are going on in the world, the polarization, but with a very wide, embracing feeling, not losing yourself in any duality, as so to speak. And we have, I mean, this recording comes from our previous talks that sometimes take 2 hours, and we get into subjects and we move from there to there and we get really inspired and really inspire each other. So yeah, we took the idea up to make this a recording, to share it with more people, and we hope it can inspire more people, a wider circle, and to become clear on the subjects we talk about, or just feel inspired, or just have a different opinion, have a different view, or take on things that are going on right in this moment in the world. So this talk is all about communities. So what I haven't mentioned yet is that you have a lot of, let's say, experience in working in communities, in setting them up, in bringing mostly women together in beautiful sacred spaces connected to earth, in highly aligned energetic spaces or places in the world, like France, like Prague itself, to actually be aligned with, let's say, a more divine, higher energy, and to actually use that energy for emergence work. Yeah, what would you love to share about that work and how you got into that, and what is it bringing you? What is it, what's your call in this work?
Well, it's lovely of you to introduce like that. Yeah, I mean, I love our talks, and I have to say before we go further that I'm a real fan of yours, because I think, like everyone, like all of us, every single person who's taken on a body and is a part of this project at the moment, our life paths, give us certain experiences, and yours is of particular interest to me, and I think that's why we have so much resonance. um, we both found ourselves um, leaving home, exploring, traveling very far afield, and being motivated by not only interest in the world and other things, but by I would say a calling, an inner calling to yeah, to understand what life is, what this is at the moment. And so yes, I think with community, I would say that I've been extremely lucky to experience um, several really extraordinary um, spontaneous flowerings of community and temporary autonomous zones.
Mm.
So I was born in the U.S. I started traveling when I was to Europe when I was 16. I was in Russia very, very early on. Um, I lived in Prague in the 90s, which was one giant euphoric uh, temporary autonomous zone, which became more and more permanent. But it was an absolute pleasure to be here in that radically creative space of um, the openness that happened in the 90s
Mm.
after the fall of the wall,
Mm.
when people, community, particularly here, there was a euphoria of openness, but also the vast creativity that comes with what do we want to make? And let's make it. The being conscious that together we can create what we want.
Mm.
And we tend to forget that when we're in societies and communities that are more rooted or who have not just spontaneously appeared, you know, those that are more let's say with a longer longevity.
Mm.
Um, but I found myself in moments and parts of communities that were really in um, radical creative exploration.
Mm.
So you know, I was at in Black Rock in the desert the first year that Burning Man, which became a very big festival in need
Yeah.
of great organization. Um, when that first started, we were just 2,000 people in the desert creating. No money was exchanged hands. We were creating um, fun, beauty, exploring for one another. And when you go through a radical creation like that in a specific place, in a specific time with a group of people, and if it happens several times, you start to understand that what we can create here, you know, in a short term for, you know, can be created in a macro, and it's an empowering sense. So
Mm.
instead of being born into a family, community, society that is largely stable, which is the positive part, but not so malleable, one can feel that it's disempowering, you know, how to make change and move when the structures are so deeply entrenched. So I think I was lucky in that I got to, that it happened in my life. My life led me to many of those kinds of moments.
Mm.
And because I worked for 10 years around the world, I used to run operations for a small development organization. So I worked a lot with communities, very rural communities in West Africa and East Africa, Nepal, India, also in Central America. Um, I was also incredibly lucky to um, be invited into communities that were extraordinarily open most of the time, the
Mm.
work that I was doing. And I got the very valuable lesson of what it is to be the foreigner
Mm.
almost everywhere. And the what makes rapport among people from very different backgrounds, very different on all level, culture, let's say, religious, philosophical, on any level.
Mm.
um, the things that make us human and our desires to connect with one another and to create with one another, of course, are the same. They are basic and they are the same everywhere. So I would say that was my great luck.
Mm.
And it continues to be my great luck. And then the last part of that was that, and not last, I would say in a way, the most foundational is that for the last 20 years, um, spiritual community, which now has become more and more a part of the common conversation, was a very strong part of my experience. Here in Bohemia, I was a part of a spontaneous community that arose around spiritual emergence. what I really appreciated about this country in particular is that there was a strong allergy to dogma at that time. I still think it's here. So any ism, you
Mm.
know, historically had proven not to work so well, or it works for a time and then it taps out. And
Yeah.
every great line of thinking and every great tool works for a time, and then because we are creative beings,
Mm.
it runs its course and it needs to shift.
Mm.
So at that time, a community grew up. It was a small community, but around 3 of us who were working very strong in spiritual emergence, very hermetically, not sharing much of that, not being very necessarily educated or with people leading us in that. But 3 of us had begun to study something called one brain kinesiology, and it was a body mind system that really opened the world for us.
Mm.
So many channels, and I would say quite extraordinary experiences opened for us.
Mm.
It was a time where, um, you know, people were interested in relieving blocks in their system so that they could more easily create the lives that they wanted.
Mm.
So things at the time that weren't so common became very common to us. Communication with plant devas, working with souls that had passed, or working in timelines to relieve stresses, and it was all very, I would say, opening and edifying. But it also had the effect that, you know, this is our system, the human system as we are in it now, and there's far more to it, of course, than we experience daily,
So we come
and that
back
there's
to
a
like
nexus.
the question, what does it means to be human in context of a wider group of people exploring that field of possibilities?
Exactly. And on the topic of community, I mean, this is really the question. Why communities formed, the earliest communities formed, is still debated. Some people think, you know, some researchers think that it was from environmental pressures,
Mm.
needing to, you know, so that people needed to consolidate in one area, or population pressures, that the resources were limited and then people gathered around the resources.
Mm.
But there's you know, the newest research shows that there's evidence that humans were gathering in community, and even nomadic, let's say nomadic peoples made small settlements,
Mm.
um, you know, even 3,000, up to 3,000 years before farming began. So
Mhm.
something is pulling human beings together, and we
Yeah.
would normally think that that would be the need for protection.
Mm.
Maybe we better protect ourselves when we're in a group. Maybe we better secure our food. We hunt better together. We gather better together. Um, but there's another aspect to that also, which is um, like I would say a psychological, emotional one. That you know, it seems as though people desired to be with one another. That it's
Mm.
something innate.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
we're
so,
social
yeah,
beings at the end of the day, I would say.
yes, yes.
Um, just one other question. Yeah, you were talking briefly about the work you are doing in those in the communities you've been working with. How would you describe that work you did with the women or with the groups?
Ah. Well, I certainly think at the time we didn't consider it a work necessarily like one would now. Um, we were gathered in a place in the mountains here because it belonged to one of our close friends, one of the women in our group, and we were using at the time something called one brain kinesiology, basically to identify things in the system that felt they were blocking our ease
Mm.
and joy and creativity in life. So it could be a phobia. Perhaps you have a cyclical pattern where, I don't know, you choose the wrong person for you in relationship, or any of these kinds of. And it was a system of a biofeedback system of asking the body um, uh, via muscles, you know, to see if there was stress in the body or not. Because the mind can create and does create many strategies to keep us safe when we're growing up. And it creates stories about our identity that can be very entrenched. So it was a way of going around that and asking questions directly of the body. And that went on for a period of time, but then very quickly, an entire new realm opened up where answers were coming to questions that weren't really even asked yet, or the system that we began with were yes, no kinds of questions, and all other kinds of information started to come. And we realized that that was also because of resonance, that we were gathering together for the purpose of supporting one another. And in the resonance of us being together, those things opened in a much more radical way, I would say. And as far as community is concerned, I think from that time, what I would say is the number one thing, and it's one of the experiences I'm most grateful for in my life, is that we came to understand the value of what it is to work transpersonally. And I believe that that is a fundamental aspect of what we would call, what we would like to be new communities, or communities in the way that we want to live now.
Yeah.
Which is that I can just give a very basic example,
Yeah.
if two people in the group were having an issue with each other, let's say person A and person B. It's not that person A is an idiot and person B is overreacting on whatever topic it is. But when some topic appears, it belongs to the group. So I know that some Native American communities work this way too. I found that out later. It makes, of course, great sense with all the wisdom that they're holding. That the first thing is to thank those who are carrying that stress for being strong enough to carry it. And then to look at it as a group and relieve it, but not at the level of Lucien and Jen having an issue.
Yeah.
But that issue itself, let's say, what could be an issue in community? There's a hot topic now, vaccination. You might have a conversation between a very strong anti-vaxxer and someone who says a world without polio, etc., is a good world. Yeah. So it really helps if we don't fall into a personalized kind of judgment of people when a certain paradigm is going through them. What really helps is to look at the paradigm itself.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of the let's say the community I feel very much belonging to right at the moment, and this is Hard IQ, the community where very age-old wisdom is used from the heart, which is like when any circle comes together, and I like the symbol of the circle as a community. An amplified field happens, so there's a larger energy field than all the individual people together. And in this field, this amplified field, heart intelligence can come in to actually transform and heal, let's say, a conflict or an issue or personal trauma or anything. And I feel this is kind of a similar thing, I feel, but it's maybe that has different wording. But what in Hard IQ, for example, happens with a conflict, there's a conflict resolution, and there are like techniques to do that. For example, the wise older counsel, or the elder counsel. And I feel that really links to also, and you were talking about the origins of community. Like I think about druids, like or in England, like whatever, like people coming together in a village, and there are elders, there are wise or elder people, but everybody's equal. And there is no centralized kind of decision making. It's like on consensus, people come together. But when there's a conflict, all the voices count equally, all the voices in a circle. And this is also what happens in Hard IQ. Everything in a circle is welcome. So there's nothing that's not welcome. To welcome the things in ourselves, the feeling that we maybe, or the things that we shame or blame in ourselves. So when this wise elder counsel is played out in a circle, the wisdom can come in the circle to move that energy and come with the wisdom and the solution, which and there's many more exercises we do there. There's shadow work. There's the shadow work is very important to move the things that we make wrong in ourselves. and to give that space, because there's a life force in there. There's some energy in there that we, if we suppress it, what we resist persists and eventually kills us. Is what Christian Pankhurst says, the founder of Heart IQ. So if we give it space and we accept it and we be aware, or we're not becoming it, but we are aware, then it can start to move, and we can get a new imprint from the people around us to have more joy. So the whole end result is just to have more joy. And then this field can become so strong that, and I think that refers to what you were saying as well, we are feeling that we're working for the collective. Like things move through our group when we all start opening up our hearts. That needs to be purged, that needs to be moved, and we are like a vehicle, like a big, you can see it as like a big ray of light coming through us and moving the stuff that needs to be moved. But at some moments it feels so epic, or like, like not ego epic, but just, wow, this was not only for us. We moved something in the collective. This was a shadow of maybe the wound of the feminine by the male perpetrator, and we played it out in a circle, and we actually played it literally out, and the women were carried by a lot of women, and she was like, like she went through the whole process of being a victim and being perpetrated, and towards like really rising in full empowerment. And well, those things have happened, I definitely feel this is happening for the collective. We are purging shadows from a collective field. Yeah, personally, I think this whole period we're living in right now is the purging of the shadow of humanity to the most extreme, which just needs to happen. So, if we extrapolate that from a small circle or community to society, then I definitely see links there where. But there are so many tools. There's not many tools. There's not many wise counsels in our world. I mean, I can't really compare a real wise from the heart living counsel with our current political leaders. I think that would be really, they look just like foolish, stupid children doing whatever they think they do, but it's not wise. Anyway, so basically this it feels like these circles and communities can be an example. Like you create something new instead of blaming the old. So it feels really like, wow, when we start being in community, when we're doing the work of heart awakening or your modality and the way you work, we partly do it for the collective. So we're purging for the collective. We were also setting a structure or an example, an energetic example of high frequency. Like this is a way we can be together with people, and it's all centered around values. Like for example, heart awakening is centered around heart awakening. We believe that the heart can awaken, and we can awaken from a rational, patriarchic kind of structure mind into our more embracing and inviting and collective heart. So that this example we set for the world, and people will look and they can choose, and they feel like, where do I feel aligned? Do I still want to go for the old, the fear, the whatever it is, or wow, these people are doing this, my heart feels the pull, and people can join. And for me, that's kind of one of the maybe functions of modern circles and communities, to create, yes, the source of creation, to create a new way of living, of course, sustainable and balanced with Mother Earth, balanced with like being open to explore our inner worlds, our shadows, our demons, whatever you call it, and to come out more alive, more joyful, and towards thriving as a group in unity, which is the opposite of being separate in a culture of separation, in social distancing, in like distance, in being in a unit to compete with each other where we're coming from. So it also feels communities are not really trendy at the moment, because we're kind of doing all the opposite things, or let's say mainstream culture seems to move towards the opposite. So to purge out those old shadows of separation, the story of separation, of blaming, shaming, polarizing, of all the things, into people waking up and, hey, there's this amazing community there. It feels much better. Let's go there. But then we're already doing the work to create those communities and groups, and like, and just basically show the world, like, this is how it can be done. We don't have to go that way if we don't want to. So it's a little bit a long story, but that's how I feel communities. Well, that's my own experience with the hard IQ community, which definitely is my family. It's like a really beautiful group of people, and again, they are operating behind, around values. So the value is like the nation flag is like a flag of, we are a new nation, borderless, and our value is accelerated awakening
Mhm.
for the collective, for ourselves, because ultimately we are in a grand, amazing awakening of humanity, I feel.
Yes, exactly. And it's so beautiful to see this evolution, that there's so the density, the psychic and emotional density on the planet has really, really, really decreased. And there's so many of these groups that are forming now, and that the desire to, let's say, awaken or be in alignment with one's, let's say, higher self, or the higher principles within this project in general, um, is accelerating to such a degree that's absolute pleasure. And it sounds very, very, very similar. The reason that people were gathering, and also the mechanisms, and what was appearing and what we were using at that time and now. I mean, I'm a part of several communities, and a global one also. I think that it's really, if we look at them, we've come very, very quickly through a major transition, not only spiritually but societally, um, going from, let's say, the changes were much slower, going from nomadic life to settled life, from tribe to, let's say, some kind of larger grouping, to nation states. Then we came into, larger alignment, let's say, with EU and Schengen. This free movement of peoples was a great dream of Europe for a long time. The fact is that we are in a global consciousness now, and we're simply in a global community now, not only because of trade and because of interdependency of goods, etc., but the consciousness, the collective consciousness, that we now need to talk about the human community and about the globe, in general, has really turned on. And this is happening very much with the movements around the environmental movements, and everything that's happening with climate change. And so I think very often there are a few reasons communities come together. External pressures or a collective problem is definitely one. All kinds of truces between warring factions have occurred because there's a greater threat. And you can make a joke out of it. I used to say years and years ago, do we need to be invaded by aliens or something in order for people to come together as the body human? And now we have had the threat, and have the threat of climate change. And more recently, we're going through the COVID scenario, which simply underscores, if it weren't obvious enough, how interdependent we all are, or how interconnected we all are.
Yeah.
And so I see in it, I mean, I understand that there are great pains. You and I happen to be privileged enough to sit in relatively comfortable situations, using an internet that's accessible to us in order to have this conversation. I'm fully aware that many people are suffering, and we talk about that a lot, and that whole distribution, that scenario. But I think it's important also to recognize that the awakening that's been happening, it's another clarion call now. It's underscoring. It's a question about family structure. I think we're living on the back of the dreams of people who came before us, right? So there were a lot of people who were born into family structures which are solid still on the planet, of course, this happens, which are not easily escapable. When it's born into the family they're born into, they have to deal with the social scenario and conform. And in our situation, and in the countries that we live in right now, we have experienced a radical level of freedom. There's been a disintegration of the stability and the, let's say, the positive effects of family and larger family groups, and yet there's a freedom that's come with that. I think what's happening now on the level of family, community, and society, we know that everything is radically changing, and we want to come into a situation where we have the freedom to be in conscious community, and from a conscious community standpoint, affect society. And I think we had plenty of communities in the 1960s. Communities were popping up, or many earlier than that. Of course, there are the great success stories like Findhorn and Damenhur and these wonderful community projects that were begun in a humble way and last for 30 or 40 years. So these this desire and these experiments have been happening all along. What's really interesting now is that it appears that, as our perception changes, at one point the earth was flat according to common perception, and then something did that perception and it was round, which changed the entire psyche and the collective psyche. When we saw the earth from space, that was a great moment, changing the collective psyche, this ball out there in this black void. And of course, prior to that, of course, that the earth was not at the center of the universe. And we're in a moment like that now, where
absolutely
something is going to happen, or is happening, that's going to shift the psyche so much that our the way we interact with one another is going to change.
I think it feels like a perception shift, the way you explain it. And I think that the shift already happened in the first weeks of COVID worldwide after 14th of March, when we realized the world has stopped. And like everything that we did, our patterns, our habits, our mass consumerism, everything, our factories, they stopped. And this is possible. We didn't die. Like, wow. We can make a conscious choice if, like whatever we want to create, because I think we tapped in as a humanity in an enormous collective awareness field that was accelerated by more vibrations coming into the earth, whatever happened. But it was a wake-up call, enormous wake-up call for humanity to just stand still, like an inner retreat for humanity. And what I find very interesting is that despite the fact that we're moving into extremes, sort of, for my perception, and that's the purging of the shadow, the masculine, the patriarchy, 2000 years for doing more science, more logic, more quantifying things, more control basically of a virus by waging a war against. It's all very masculine, to really fight it and destroy it, and then we're up to the next problem, but and so you can't fix those problems with all the things that made them happen in the first place, like Albert Einstein said. We was kind, like somehow we don't still get that. But in relation to what you say, I really feel that one of those purging out of the extreme is the individualized society. You're talking about family. Definitely in the 90s, 2000, we were becoming more and more individualized in our boxes, in our flats, plugged onto our TVs and competing with each other about, for never enough money. So we were having this feeling that we need more and more money to pay off our debt. But the money is just, in 32 years, your income has halved because of inflation. So not many people realize that, but there's never going to be more money for you, just less. And anyway, and also from this paradigm of the infinite growth, economic growth on a finite planet. So these kind of big paradigms we had in our economy, they are starting to tilt. They are starting to be untrue because they cannot be. So this in certain, so the ground has been swept under our feet. Our common like perceptions of reality, and also our like our masculine goals, like, yeah, we want to have like another 5% growth next year, all these kind of like yeah, like, let's say, goal paradigms, they are seeming to be crumbling down. They are probably not going to be true. Maybe they are not true anymore. And as well as the story of separation that we have embraced so long, and being in those individualized boxes, being in the individualized world of competing with each other, I definitely feel that a community but can offer a ground, a space, a foundation for moving into this unity consciousness. And also I want to say that the individualization, all these phases, they are not wrong. They had their function. So I feel that in the individualization, it's like a child, become you're 14, and you kind of push yourself away from the parents, and you really now start to need to feel like, who am I? So your identity forms, and your ego. So I think this was a phase of like, for humanity to explore, for people to explore their egos, and to going inside and like really knowing who they are from an ego perspective. But now I feel that through communities, it's possible to lay back and to lose the sense of competition, and to be nurtured by our brothers and sisters, and to move away from competing into some sort of social dividend, into giving, into a more gifting economy, into being there for the community with your gifts and your purpose, and just give that. And then you start, like, accumulating, let's say, the social dividend. So when you're older, the community will give back to you. You don't have to depend on a pension or money, or be afraid that you will be left out of society, because this is almost the reverse. Society and the group and the circle and community will hold you and will value your being older and having all that wisdom. And I feel that one of the major shifts that's going to occur is this losing of the sense of being individuals. And this is a huge thing. It's like we're moving out of the story of separation into feeling interconnected. We're literally interconnected beings. You are me, cleverly disguised as you. But this can be this can become a experience, an experience that people were going to really experience in a group, in a circle, in a community. And this feels so amazing to me, to tap into that reality where you can lay back from the paradigm of being individualized, being a separate being amongst a hostile world of danger and threats and whatever, into a nurturing field of oneness, unity, where you have explored your complete ego. So you know who you are, you know your shadow, you transformed, you own your shit, everything. You work through your masculine and men's group. You can meet the feminine, the divine. You can merge in a perfect, like, divine unity. And this amazing feeling of you are now part of the larger group. Your being dissolves into being merged with the unity consciousness. You can let go of the competition. You are just giving your gifts and your joy, your being, your presence, and that's enough. And I definitely feel that as something that's ahead of us, and it's going to be amazing. It's just we're not there yet, but for me, that's one of the thresholds for communities to bring that new story of interconnectivity. So that's, again, a little bit of a long story with all
Yeah.
kind of sideways, but it's this core feeling I definitely have, as now it doesn't look like it at all in the world, with all the distancing and people being driven apart with the mouth caps and all of this. It's just temporarily. This will all pass. But this is just the pushing that individualized me ego, like, and also the the isolated, not connected, suffering being even more in their isolation, which will snap. This will snap because people eventually. So this is needed. This is absolutely needed. What do you think about that?
I think that the isolation, let's say, or the, time alone that you're talking about that's come up now, is extraordinarily valuable. The great mystics and the great, teachings of all mysticism basically, talks about that, and the looking inside, the turning the perspective back to
Yeah.
the self, and the great realized beings, who felt that unity and that oneness and understood that they were that oneness, did so by that kind of introspection. And we have a moment now where, like you said, that's a kind of it's an opportunity, for, more of that turning inside. I don't know how many people on the planet are able and have, the conditions to be able to do so. But, I think it's important, to remember that we're living inside a biological structure. We have two hemispheres of the brain. We have this thing we call the back brain, also the reptilian brain, that reacts to fears in certain ways, and that's also very highly stimulated now.
Hmm.
Generally, it's better, to make a cognitive error if you see something in the path and you assume it's a snake and you jump back and it's just a stick. You might look a little bit silly, but you're still alive. If you make the opposite error, which is I trust, I love, we're all, let's say a cognitive error, you pick up that snake, you can have an issue. So I think that's the kind of basis for how we react. Also in a group, we know that we react in a more fearful, a more, let's say, automated way, back brain way, than we do when we're in acting on our own. This is why very often if there's a crime happening and there's a group witnessing it, perhaps no one calls the police because they assume someone else is doing it. So when we think about the biology, I've long thought, okay, this great wiring, this kind of, incredible mechanism that we have in the wiring between these hemispheres. Of course, we imagine that is getting stronger and stronger, that more and more is being activated there. And if you have a stroke on particular one side of your brain, everything becomes, so separated that you can't, that there's no, context and interconnection. If you have a stroke on the other side, everything is unity, but you can't tell one number from another. So we have these two aspects inside us, and my feeling is that we've gone as far as perception evolution, from many gods external to one God external, to an idea of the fact that God may be accessible internal. And I feel that evolutionarily where we're coming, is that all that God is internal. And this seems like a paradox when we're talking about community. But I have the feeling that instead of the, collective mind being needed to create, this thing that happened in the 1920s, when quantum mechanics and then the observer effect, I think it was Pascal Jordan who was working with Niels Bohr in the 1920s, when they said, not only does observing disturb the result, it disturbs the measurement, it produces it. And
Yeah.
as far as perspective, this is the major perspective that is shifting, or that's driving the shift now. And we still haven't integrated it. We don't even teach this, concept properly, because our minds are unable to really get around how we are shifting, how reality shifts according to how our observation is taking place.
Hmm.
And so, I have the feeling now that, as we go through this shift, this larger shift, we're taking more and more responsibility for how we see the world, how we think about the world. What about our mental hygiene? And how much energy do we put behind ideas that we don't want to see manifest? How
Yeah.
dedicated are we to putting our energies towards the things and committing that energy to things that we want to see? And one of the great benefits of community also, whether it be around a religious idea or a civic idea or what have you, is that when a group of people are in resonance with one another and support an idea, of course that manifestation is quicker. There's something stronger there. And this can happen very quickly. Like I said, people under threat, and they just stop fighting among themselves and decide to meet that threat. A change can happen more quickly. But I have a feeling, I was told by a wonderful woman, shaman, Alicia Hum, that Black Elk said, in the new time, there's time for everything.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like our perception of time is changing. And in the sense of how creation happens, our linearity. And right now, we are experiencing, I think, what it is to understand that divinity happens here internally. And I would just share one more thing, and I hope it's not too far afield for our conversation. But
Nothing
you
is.
mentioned I'm not sure who's supposed to be listening to this, so we see.
Well,
But you talked about 2,200 years ago, and this is our reference point because we're living in societies that have grown out of this monotheistic Judeo-Christian, and also later like basically the religions of the book, yes,
yeah.
and the idea that of the one God as a progression. That one God at that time became or was an externalized idea. And I think that that's still what we call the foxhole God. When something really threatens you, apparently human beings go back to their first idea of God, and the idea of an omnipotent off-planet God is what a lot of people revert to. And I think what was happening really, which so shifted paradigm 2,200 years ago with that community around the person that we call Jesus, that movement, that very hippie, untraditional love movement that was happening at the time. I'm sure all of the goodly pagan families were worried about their sons and daughters getting involved in this because it seemed so radical.
Yeah.
What seems to me to have been really being said there is don't look external. The same that Buddha said, look internally, don't look external. And the deification of the personage of Jesus is understandable. To have such a master over the elements, master over the 5 elements here, these things that seem suprahuman, it's absolutely understandable. And I agree. But I think that the teaching was the directive, look internal.
Yes.
And yes, and those for God, in the sense that the priestly caste who are closer to God, who translate for God, who teach you about God, that's one area, that's doctrine. But experientially, where divinity happens is this relationship.
So this is super interesting, and I just want to take this one step further. Because it just me speaking from a global community, like a world moving into a unified field where everybody becomes one becomes all, and we are in contact with all the conscious people. We're moving in this unified field, so there's no separation between me and the other, which like intrinsically could include all human beings on the planet. And this like then would be connected to the kind of a singularity in technology, where this is also, I think technology always moves kind of equally with our spiritual development. And the endpoint of data collection and connectivity is actually singularity, where like that's like the Borg. Maybe you remember the movie The Borg, with this eye, and one point is connected to the all. The only problem is that there's also then one central point of control possible. So that's of course the fear possibility. But I'm tapping into this reality now, where through your words and channel, I feel it's like, wow, what, if Bentinho is right. I think Bentinho Massara said something like, from our own reality that we create intrinsically, we can create a collective reality that might be completely different than another, let's say, group's reality. So then we're breaking down already the collective human world, collective consciousness into groups, let's say communities of consciousness. And would it be true that then, from my belief in reality and my my development as a human being and my mind and my capacity and my feeling and my heart and my whatever I've collected all along the way, when I believe enough that I create my reality from a divine place. So nothing outside of me is outside of me anymore. It's all my creation. This is me. So the whole divine a manifestation is just an expression of my divinity and my soul and me. And if people align with that idea and we come together, and those people are also me, so like basically then it's possible to create a reality, a time space momentum or vacuum that can be completely different than another reality that's happening in another time space, whatever, more dense or less dense time. And maybe already we're living this. Maybe we're already actually, which is a funny idea.
I think that this is
What do you think
most
about that?
likely. Yeah, I think it's most likely the case that it has happened, and that many parallels exist. I mean, that's somewhat my direct experience, and I think as far as this project now of being on this planet here, the being human and being a fractal of the divine is not a monoculture. If we, for argument's sake, if we take it like a child's fairy tale, if the ultimate at one point was longing to know itself so much that it broke itself into uncountable amounts of pieces, and that those pieces got to experience one another in order to, through all levels of different types of experiences, understand a bit of what the mosaic of the divine is, that unity never ceases to exist. And if it comes back to an original point of unity, one could say perhaps after death or what have you, and even in our own moments of consciousness, we can attain that kind of let's say all-consuming or all-inclusive unity. But this is a garden. This is not a monoculture. The soil in the garden can give life to all of those different kinds of flowers, trees, beings. And when we look at each other and interact with one another, that is the great delight of being human.
Okay,
So,
would this include that we should stop watching for humanity to go to a certain direction and being concerned where we're going as humanity, but more concerned about our peers, our group, and the reality we co-create?
I think there's a dual thing going on because we're on a precipice, we're really in this moment. So the thing that has been created with a desensitization through the media about the things that affect others, for example, or this radical kind of individualism, which makes non-caring for the elderly or even for aspects of ourselves. That is still a part of that. The Lakota talk about the medicine wheel, and that they believe that we have come through, or ending this period of the white man in the North, which the poison of the white man, that phase, it's a phase, it's not a being, it's a phase. The poison there is the mind separated from the heart, but the medicine is the mind united with the heart. Same two aspects, just a different state. And so our individual desensitization because of individualization is a kind of poison. But the medicine for that is to align inside ourselves. And we talk about coming more into the divine feminine, etc. But it's really about intention, clarity, and reception uniting in one moment. If you want to, in one being. And so I think that yes, and yes. I think that there can be a radically nourishing global community. I think that there can be stunning smaller group communities, and how the shifting from one to the other or that evolution will look, that's a question. Of course, when there's a habit, that's formed at the level of the subconscious in a human being, it needs to really be released in order for a new thing to take its place. And as a collective, we are under a radical long era of a habitual way of being.
Yeah.
And it includes paradigms like ownership, which
Yeah.
is a rabbit hole that most people can't even go down, because when settlers came to North America, what's now the U.S., and were meeting with indigenous tribes, the idea that one can put down a square on the land and say mine, the response was, what are you gonna do? You can't own the land. What are you gonna do next? Own the air and the water?
Yeah,
Well,
that was alien.
essentially, yes.
That was
And
alien. Yeah.
now we're in that, we're seeing that poisonous outcome. But for me, it's very much about the geometry. If you have 4 sons and you have ownership, it's easier to cut up a square. Circular thinking, like you were talking about, let's say, making decisions in groups, etc. I think this is really the circle, as you used it as a metaphor, is really key. Because anything that has to do with my relationship to the divine, or my channeling, or the way I see it being better than yours, is inherently flawed. So if we can align to our own access, our own relationship with the divine, and at the same time recognize that and deeply respect it in others, then that's really unity community. And I think what I was talking about transpersonal work, and when you were talking about the heart IQ, that this is really, this was happening years ago for me. I still consider it one of the most valuable things, which is not to deal only at the individuated level. Group work can be therapeutic. There can be things that each individual needs, but that's a microcosm of a macrocosm. We're all dealing with different levels of programming, different levels of attaining of freedom. And so we should have compassion to one another. And if there's enough consciousness to look at it, receive, respect, thank that person for being strong enough to hold it, and then to really look at it, to release it together, I think that's an extraordinary mechanism. It accelerates our evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and at the end of the day, we're just all living on one planet, I guess. Maybe we have separate realities, and like in different universes where there's other planets. But I feel normally in my life, from day to day, I live on one planet. I can see the sea, I feel the breeze, I can hear the birds. This is one planet. It feels like this is a truth, and our planet has brought us to a halt. And this is what Charles Eisenstein said so brilliantly. Like, when you're addicted to patterns, and the whole addiction falls away for a moment, you can redecide if you really want to stay addicted to the addiction that's actually will, it's not nurturing, and it's not, basically it's going to destroy maybe all of us or parts of the world. It's just a moment of a step back, and definitely what you say about coming to a more responsible ownership would mean the ownership of yes, on one side our divinity and all that beautiful connection that comes with the divine in ourselves, and then connected and seeing that in all of the others, as well as owning our shadows, our non-integrated parts that we push away, that we are shaming or blaming, or that we're afraid of, and because that still makes us not whole beings. We're still feeling separate inside of ourselves. And what usually happens is that we project that outside in the world, where then this is just a mirror for our stuff that we have to deal with and have to own. Plus, on the third thing is, if we manage to all get that together, that divinity, that owning our shadows and owning all the things we need to own, and owning the planet as a living organism and seeing it as a living organism, that where we come from and we will return to, and stepping into the great feeling of gratitude of just being alive. That is like a huge present and a gift. And from that feeling, start gifting back to, yeah, everything around us, then life suddenly feels very simple. And why did we make it so complicated? Well, to learn all those lessons, to move through all those shadows, to purge out of those possibilities and shadows. That's just what we're doing. And if we take one step even further back, that's all divine. That's actually all freaking, because being here means this is already the Garden of Eden. We are already, and it's just our mind and our perception and our constant judgment that disturbs and distorts a reality that is infinite blissful and infinite joyful and infinite beautiful. And just tapping into that reality, into ourselves, I think that will accelerate that becoming manifested around us. And that's one of the things I'll do with stories. I'm keep on telling the story of that image of a new humanity. However, from this gratitude and from this stepping into that certain reality, and using that imagination and putting it into words and storytelling to make it come alive with people that feel it and feel aligned, and then gather those people as a clan. I call it the Earth Wisdom Tribe, Earth Wisdom Awakening. But I feel it's definitely earth oriented, much more than the earth. Yeah, the paradigm we're just coming out of making nature separate from ourselves. And then we come back to Black Elk. Like, you can't own the river. If you think you can own the river, are you going to own the air? And if you turned all the resources and trees into money and it's all gone, you're going to realize that you can't eat money, right?
Yes, just it wasn't Black Elk who said that, but yes, it's
Yeah, well,
that's the idea. Yeah. You know, I just something you were saying reminded me that, you know, we have this massive creative power. Obviously, look what we've made already. We, community or society, value money, what we value. It's all just a collective agreement.
yeah.
So we can change that collective agreement at any moment. So, you know, the first currency was salt because the human body needs it to live and survive. Gold, at some point, someone thought gold looked like the sun, so we decided to value it over other metals. I mean, in the Nordic countries, amber was the same because had captured the sun, for example. You know, we at the moment we value sports stars, we value many things, and it's good to look at the breakdown of why. You know, people who are really reaching mastery, we value mastery. We value people who really go for the thing that they want to do. There's something that's attractive in that. But with Bitcoin, for example, there's an amazing proof case for the fact that value can be assigned to anything and to nothing if enough people believe in it. So, you know, on Easter Island, with the creation of those incredible statues and that society, what they were doing and their belief system and what they were creating, they needed trees to to process those stones and to move them to the edge of the island. And I always had a thought, like, at one point there must have been a group of humans standing there with the last few trees. And it's an interesting thing about our psyche, what we can do around common beliefs. And we've had eras, I mean, we've had situations where in war, for example, you have to convince an entire group of fighters that the other is less than human or non-human. And if you can make this thought pattern strong enough, then action can happen. So to the positive, we can create all kinds of change just by shifting our collective agreement.
Mm.
Money as we know it, paper money, is a debt note. It's an IOU. So shifting around what we value, I think, is radically important right now, because automation, when great revolutions in the past have happened, let's say peasants' revolutions have happened and had weight because those hands and those people were needed to farm the land. When agriculture became collectivized, or when a lot of factory work became automated, affected a certain part of the population. People lost jobs, etc. But now, and particularly also with COVID, with everything going online, etc., we've been in a long period of kind of within our own systems making ourselves obsolete within a production paradigm economy. And human beings are not, the value of a human being is not what they produce or how hard they work. If that were the case, then coolies in India would be making a ton of money with all the terrible, like hard physical work they're doing. So it is not what we assign value to, and what we pay money for is not really related to the value of being human. And to be honest, my feeling is that we are approaching, or are already at a state where, if you're in a pyramid structure, let's say, earlier on, these hands were needed for agriculture, these were needed for production, etc., in order for this part to be comfortable. With automation, the fact is that this part can be comfortable without all of this. And democracy was based on this being necessary, these people being necessary, and their voices having weight. So we're in a major shift where we need to redefine what the value is of being human, and how we are going to collectively create decisions and govern ourselves. Because the old structure, also of governing, is not going to support the flourishing of all of humankind that is on the planet now. We need a new paradigm for that.
I think we are slowly moving into the paradigm of decentralization. Basically, going from pyramid to flat, we spread and then we connect. Maybe that's a really great topic for a next talk, because that's moving more in towards like economy, decentralized governance, the agreement on what kind of exchange we're going to use,
but it's also a direct mirror for next time. It's also a direct mirror of how we conceive of the divine.
That's
and
super
so
interesting.
our own evolution internally, individually, is driving this. And that's why, you're saying, pulling together communities and working on awareness, or internal awareness, is so key right now.
Great. Yeah, I think we're over 1.5 hours, which is amazing. That's cool. Thank you
We
so much.
To do that when we start talking.
We started off with communities. We went through a lot of different, more also metaphysical, reality creation abilities, from linear time to like different realities, and going back to our old forefathers and mothers in their with their challenges, with their different sides of the heads and brain, to we have covered, like, we went through a really beautiful journey. Thank you so much. And I also love that there is not really conclusion, like, now we got it, communities, they're here to do this, because that's, again, this kind of solution thinking paradigm, where there's a problem and then we do something and there's a solution, which I feel is also going to be less and less true. We are in a process society, let's say, where we have the feeling we move towards something, but we're just like spiritual beings having this human experience in our bodies. And
anytime we latch on to capital IT, it's inherently not the case. So
absolutely. Yeah. I definitely feel the rebalancing, going a little bit from the mind into the heart, for many people will make it more possible to also enjoy more just the moment and be in a moment with each other, connected, because the heart connects. The heart is an organ that connects, and I wish like everybody watching this, people in the world to having their beautiful journey into rebalancing, I think, the mind and the heart into balance with nature, with each other, making a more beautiful world that our hearts, all of our hearts, know is possible deep inside, and in the process healing the planet as well, which is us. So when
Yes, which is I would just say, it's a beautiful thing to feel the movement from doing to being, and from surviving to thriving and creating.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And
thank you. It's
have
great
a
to talk.
wonderful day.
You too. You too. Thank you.
Ciao.